The accusation came at the harvest feast, in front of 300 guests, when the Dowager Countess of Marrowby rose from her gilded chair, lifted one ringed finger toward the high table, and said in a voice pitched to carry the full length of the hall, "Look at her, 2 years a wife to the Duke of Ravenscar, and her womb as empty as a beggar's bowl. Barren. There is no kinder word, and I will not pretend to find one." Lady Eleanor Vale did not drop the silver cup she was holding. That was the first thing she noticed about herself, in the long, ringing silence that followed, that her hand stayed steady, that the candlelight still trembled gold in the dark wine, that her fingers did not betray her even when every face in the great hall of Ravenscar turned toward her at once. She set the cup down with care, the way one sets down something one does not wish to break, and the small click of silver on oak was the only sound in 300 held breaths. At the head of the table, her husband did not look at her. That was the second thing she noticed, and it cut deeper than the word the old woman had thrown. Sebastian Thorne, 8th Duke of Ravenscar, 6 feet and 2 inches of cold aristocratic stone, his near black hair swept back from a face built for command, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the carved swan at the center of the table, as though it might at any moment tell him what to do. He did not rise. He let the word stand in the air where the dowager had hung it, and by not striking it down, he agreed to it. Eleanor counted. It was a habit she carried since girlhood, a way to keep her hands from shaking and her voice from climbing. When the world tilted, she counted the things that were still hers. She had 3. The thin gold chain at her throat, which had been her mother's. The locked diary in the second drawer of her writing desk upstairs, whose small brass key hung warm against her breastbone on that same chain. And a secret, folded so small and held so deep that not one soul in that hall, not the dowager, not the gossiping ladies, not the Duke himself, knew she carried it. 3 things. She held them and she rose. "Madam," Eleanor said, and her voice did not climb. It went the other way, tucked low even, the voice of a woman reading a verdict rather than pleading against one. "You have called me a name in my husband's house, at my husband's table, before my husband's guests. I will not return it. I was not raised to throw words I have not weighed." She turned slowly, taking in the hall, the long tables, the banked candles, the tapestries breathing in the draught that always moved through Ravenscar, no matter how high they built the fires. "But I will say this once, so that none of you may claim afterward that you did not hear it. A house is measured by what it does with what it is given. Remember that you said this tonight. Remember the date. It was the 9th of October. Outside, the first hard frost of the year was already silvering the conservatory glass. Eleanor noted that too, through the tall black windows, the white creeping up the panes. And she thought, with a calm that surprised her, that some things take a season to ripen and some take longer, and the ones that take longest are the ones worth waiting for. She left the hall. She did not run. She walked the full length of it with her head level and her crimson skirts whispering against the stone, past the staring faces, past the rival who would later matter more than any of them, Lady Cassia Fenwick, golden-haired, pale-gowned, seated near the Duke's right hand with a small private smile she did not trouble to hide. Eleanor walked past that smile too. And only when the great doors had closed behind her, only when the cold of the corridor closed over her, did she allow herself one breath that shook. One. Then she steadied it and climbed the stairs to her rooms and unlocked the diary and wrote the date at the top of a clean page and beneath it a single line. They have decided what I am. They are wrong, and they will live to learn it. She did not yet know how thoroughly. The trouble had a shape, and the shape was Cassia Fenwick. Eleanor was not a fool, and she had not been a fool on her wedding day either, when she had stood beside a cold stranger, delivered to her in a contract drawn between her dead father's debts and the Duke's living name. She had known even then that there was a woman who had wanted the place she was being put into. She had seen Cassia at the edges of every gathering for 2 years, beautiful and patient, and she had understood the patience for what it was. The Duke needed an heir. A duke without an heir was a door standing open to every cousin and claimant and grasping branch of a grasping family. And a wife who could not give him one was a wife who could, in time, be set quietly aside. What Eleanor had not understood, not until the morning after the feast, was how far the old dowager and her golden protégé were willing to go to make the setting aside come faster. She learned it from the smallest person in the house. His name was Pip, and he was the underfootman's boy, 8 years old, all elbows and freckles, and a cap too large for his head. And he had attached himself to Eleanor in her first month at Ravenscar, because she was the only person above stairs who had ever asked him his name. On the morning after the feast, while the house still slept off its wine, Pip found her in the cold conservatory among the frost-killed roses, and he tugged at her sleeve, and his small face was white. "My lady," he whispered. "I heard something. By the still room. I weren't meant to." Eleanor knelt down to his height among the dead roses. "Then tell me, and we will both be unmeant to have heard it, and it will be our secret." "What did you hear, Pip?" "The old countess and the gold lady, Lady Fenwick." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "They were talking about your tea, my lady. The countess said, she said it weren't taking fast enough. The gold lady said, be patient. The countess said she'd waited 2 years, and she wouldn't wait a third. Then she said," Pip swallowed. "She said to put more in the next pot. She said you'd sicken slow, and everyone would say it was the Baroness that did it. Women like you waste away," she said, "and no one would think to look." The frost ticked against the glass. Somewhere in the house a clock counted the hour, slow and indifferent. Eleanor knelt very still among the dead roses and felt the floor of her life shift quietly beneath her, and she understood all at once 2 things that hadn't connected before. The strange flatness she had felt these last months, the way food had gone to ash in her mouth, the tiredness she had blamed on grief and cold. It hadn't been grief. It had been the pot. "Pip," she said, and her voice was very gentle because the boy was shaking, "you have done a brave thing, the bravest thing in this whole house. Now I need you to do one more, and it is harder because it is to do nothing. You will not tell anyone you told me. You will fetch and carry and play the fool exactly as before. Can you do that?" He nodded, his cap slipping. "And from this morning," Eleanor said, "you will be the only one who carries my tea, from the kitchen to my hand. No one else touches it. If anyone asks, you will say I have grown particular and like my own boy to bring it. Can you do that?" He nodded again, fiercer this time. "Good lad." She pressed the warm brass key of her diary briefly into his palm, let him feel it, took it back. "Now you and I keep a secret together. and a secret kept between two honest people is the strongest thing in the world, stronger than any poison. She did not weep until he had gone, and even then she did not weep long, because Eleanor Vale had just understood the largest thing of all. They meant to kill her, slowly, deniably, with a dead woman's reputation as the cover. And they meant to do it now, in a hurry, before the 3rd year. Pip had caught one more scrap on his way out of the still room. The Countess had said, with the flat certainty of a woman who had already decided that the thing wanted doing before the new year. 9 weeks. Eleanor wrote it in the diary. 9 weeks before the dowager's patience ran out entirely. She was, by her own careful count, 11 weeks gone with child. She had told no one. Not the Duke, who had not come to her rooms in months, and would not have believed it if she had. Not the physician who answered to the dowager, not a single soul. She had known for 3 weeks, since the morning the world had swayed, and she had pressed her hand flat to her stomach in the cold dawn and felt, beneath the fear, a small fierce certainty. She had said nothing because she'd not known whom to trust. Now she knew. She could trust no one, and that terribly was a kind of clarity. If she stayed, the poison would take both of them. The dowager would never let a child be born to undo 2 years of patient scheming. A barren duchess could be set aside. A duchess with a son could not, and so the duchess and the son would both, sadly, regrettably, waste away together, and the path would be clear for golden Cassia to step into the warm place by the Duke's side and fill it, in time, with an heir of the right blood. Eleanor would not allow it. She had been given a poisoned cup, and a husband's averted eyes, and a frost-killed garden, and a secret 11 weeks deep. She would do something with it. She would vanish, and she would not come back until she came back holding the one thing no one in that hall could take from her hands. 7 weeks remained of the dowager's 9. Eleanor spent 2 of them watching, mapping, and waiting for the new moon. The leaving took 9 days to arrange, and Eleanor arranged every hour of it the way she had once arranged her father's failing accounts. Quietly, completely, leaving nothing for anyone to read in the wreckage. She emptied small sums she was owed. She sold through Pip and a trusted carter the teardrop earrings and 2 combs, keeping only her mother's chain and the diary's brass key. She wrote letters she did not send and burned them. And on the 9th night, the night of the new moon, when the great house lay black, and the frost had thickened to a hard glaze on every road, with 5 weeks left of the dowager's 9, with the clock still running, Eleanor Vale walked out of Ravenscar, the way she had walked out of the great hall, without running, without a backward glance, her head level and her heart counting. She left one thing behind. On the cold pillow of the bed her husband had not shared in half a year, she laid the diary's brass key, and beside it a single sheet, folded once, her hand steady to the last word. You let them name me at your own table, and you did not look at me. So I have taken back the only thing that was ever mine to take. Do not look for me. You will not find me until I wish to be found. And when I am found, you will understand at last what you let walk out of this house. E. She did not leave the diary she carried. Some things a woman keeps. The cold nearly killed her before any poison could. She traveled north on foot and on the kindness of carters, away from the Duke's lands, away from anyone who might know the crimson-gowned Duchess by sight, until crimson was a memory, and she wore the gray, homespun of a widow, and answered to a name that was not hers. She was sick on the roads, sick with cold and with the child. 11 weeks at the beginning, then 12, then 14, the weeks counting up against the miles she put between herself and Ravenscar, each number a small victory no one could take from her. Twice riders in Ravenscar livery passed her on the post road, and she turned her face to a hedgerow and held still until the hoofbeats faded north past her. They never thought to look for her among the poor. The poor were invisible. That had always been the lesson Ravenscar taught, and now it was the lesson that saved her. She washed up at the last of her strength in a gray fishing town on a gray northern coast, where the wind never stopped, and no one had ever heard the name Ravenscar, and she found shelter in the only place that asks no questions of a sick woman with a little money and a level head, the back room of a midwife. The midwife's name was Mother Aldous, and she was 70 years old, and she had brought half the town into the world and seen the other half out of it. And she looked at Eleanor for the length of one long breath and said, "You're running from a man." "From a house," Eleanor said. "Same thing, usually." Mother Aldous set a pot of clean tea. Clean. Eleanor watched her brew it from leaf to cup and drank it and waited for treachery and felt only warmth, and sat across the rough table. "You've got money you're hiding and manners you can't, and you flinch at horses, and you're far enough along that you shouldn't be on the roads at all. I won't ask your name. I'll ask one thing. The child. Is it wanted?" It was the first time in 11 weeks anyone had asked Eleanor what she wanted. Something in her, held rigid for so long, came loose all at once, and she pressed her hand flat against the curve beneath the gray homespun, and the answer came up out of her without ornament. "More than my own life," Eleanor said. "More than my own name. It is the only thing in this world that is wholly mine, and I crossed 3 counties on foot to keep it alive, and I would cross 3 more. Yes, it is wanted." Mother Aldous nodded once, as though a contract had been signed. "Then you'll stay, and you'll work. I'll not feed an idle mouth, Duchess, or whatever you are. You'll learn the trade. There's no better hiding place in the world than usefulness." So Eleanor Vale, 8th Duchess of Ravenscar, named Barren before 300 guests, became Nell the midwife's woman in a gray town at the edge of the sea. She learned to boil linen and grind herbs and read a laboring woman's face. She learned which teas brought milk and which brought sleep, and she did not forget this. She wrote it in the diary by candlelight. Which leaves, in which quantity, would sicken a healthy woman slowly, while everyone said it was her own weak blood. The dowager had taught her to fear that knowledge. Mother Aldous taught her to own it. Eleanor found she preferred owning things. The child came in the deep of winter, in a storm that shook the shutters and put out the candles, and it was a long, hard night, and near the end of it, when Eleanor's strength was a thread and the wind was screaming and Mother Aldous's old hands were sure and steady in the dark, Eleanor heard the cry, high and furious and alive. A son. She held him against her in the stormlight, this small, red, roaring scrap of a person, and she counted. Because the counting had never stopped. It had only changed its object. One thing now, it was everything. It had her mother's eyes in a roar that shook the walls, and she named him in the diary that very night. She called him Gideon. It had been her father's name. It meant, in the old tongue, the one who cuts down. She thought that was right. She thought that was very right. and she wrote beneath the name on the night of her son's birth, the second line of the only vow she had ever made. They named me Barren and cast me out. I will return holding the only heir to the name they tried to steal, not to plead, to collect. 4 years passed in the gray town by the sea, and they were not unhappy years, which surprised Eleanor more than the misery would have. Gideon grew. He grew into a dark-haired, gray-eyed boy with his mother's level head and a stubbornness that made the whole street laugh. And he grew with the storm-gray eyes of a man who did not know he had a son, eyes that, every single day, told Eleanor exactly whose child she had carried out of Ravenscar in case she had ever been tempted to forget. She did not forget. She did not stew either. That was the discipline she set herself. Harder than the cold and harder than the work. She wouldn't let the wound run her. She kept the diary, she kept the count, and she kept her ear to the road because a midwife hears everything. Birth and death and scandal passed through her hands, and slowly over 4 years, the news came north in scraps, the way driftwood comes up a beach. The Duke of Ravenscar had not remarried. That was the first scrap, and it sat oddly with her, and she turned it over many nights. The dowager had pressed him toward Cassia Fenwick. The whole county knew it. The bands half cried, and he had refused. He had grown cold, the carter said, colder than he had ever been, a haunted cold. He had torn the great hall apart looking for a woman who had vanished into a frost. He had ridden the post roads himself the first winter, and the second, until the dowager called it madness, and the county called it grief. And Cassia Fenwick's patient smile began, at last, to curdle. The second scrap came in the 4th spring, and it changed everything, and it came, as these things do, through the trade. A great lady's traveling carriage broke an axle on the coast road in an April storm, and the great lady within was near her time, too near, and there was no one for miles but Mother Aldous, who was abed with the winter cough. And so it was Nell the midwife's woman who went out into the rain with her bag in her steady hands and delivered a vice-countess of a healthy daughter on the floor of a wayside inn while the storm screamed and the great lady wept and clutched her wrist. And the great lady, safe and grateful, and propped on borrowed pillows, with her new daughter at her breast, looked at the calm, gray-eyed midwife who had pulled her through the worst night of her life, and frowned. "I know your face." Eleanor's hands did not stop their work. "Many faces look alike by candlelight, my lady." "No." The Viscountess's frown deepened, and she was a sharp woman under the gratitude, the Marchioness of Harlow's own niece, and she had spent a season at court. "No, I have seen you. 4 years gone. The harvest feast at—" She stopped. Her eyes went wide. "At Ravenscar, you were at the high table. You were the Duchess. They said you died. They said you wasted away in some convent. The Barren one, they—" The Viscountess's voice dropped to a whisper, and her grip tightened on Eleanor's wrist. "You're alive. Sweet heaven. You're alive, and you've a child by the look of this house, and the whole of Ravenscar is in mourning for a dead duchess who is wringing out my birthing linen with her own hands." The fire ticked. Outside, the storm was passing, the way storms do, leaving the world washed and very clear. Eleanor finished folding the linen. She set it down with care, and she looked at the Viscountess, and she made the largest decision of her life in the space of one breath. She had a witness now, a great lady, a court lady, a grateful one, whose own child she had just saved, a woman whose the word no one could call a peasant's lie. For 4 years, Eleanor had waited for the one thing she lacked, the one thing that would turn a vanished wife's return from a scandal into a reckoning. She had needed to be seen and named and believed by someone they could not dismiss. "My lady," Eleanor said quietly, "what I am about to ask of you, I ask in payment for nothing, though I have tonight put your daughter living into your arms. I ask it because you are the first person in 4 years who has said my true name and not flinched from it. Will you help me go home?" They returned to Ravenscar on the first warm day of the year, and they returned the way Eleanor had planned it across 4 years of gray winters. Not creeping, not pleading, not at night. At noon, by the front gate, in the Marchioness of Harlow's own crested carriage, with the Marchioness's niece beside her as living witness, and a small gray-eyed boy of 4 sitting straight-backed on the seat, watching the great dark house come up out of the trees with the frank, fearless interest of a child who has never been told to be afraid of anything. "Is that where we are going, Mamma?" Gideon asked. "That is your father's house," Eleanor said. "Is it nice?" She considered the question with the honesty she had always given him. "It is very grand," she said, "and it has been very unkind. We are going to teach it to be better. Sit straight. Whatever is said in the next hour, you say nothing, and you hold my hand. And you remember that you have done nothing wrong, and neither have I. Do you understand?" He put his small hand in hers. "Yes, Mamma." The hall was full. That was the thing Eleanor had counted on, and the reason she had chosen this day. The Duke held his quarterly assembly. The county come to Ravenscar to pay rents and air grievances, and so the great hall, where she had been named Barren 4 years before, was once again packed wall to wall with the very people who had heard it said. The Dowager Countess of Marrowby was there, 4 years older and 4 years harder. Cassia Fenwick was there, no longer patient, the curdle gone all the way to sour. And at the head of the hall, on the dais, beneath the carved swans, sat Sebastian Thorne, 8th Duke of Ravenscar, gray-eyed and grim, and 4 years more alone than the last time his wife had stood in this room. The doors opened. Eleanor walked in. She did not run. She walked every yard of the hall with her spine straight and her plain gray skirts whispering against the stone, though the skirts were gray and not crimson, and somehow that was worse for the watchers, that she came back without grandeur and was not ashamed. The talk died in waves before her, the way talk does, until the great hall held 300 held breaths, exactly as it had 4 years before, and the only sound was a midwife's plain boots on the Ravenscar stone, and the small lighter steps of a child keeping pace beside her, his hand in hers. On the dais, the Duke rose. He came to his feet slowly, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her face as though it might at any moment dissolve, and the color went out of him entirely. And for the first time in 4 years, and in the whole of their marriage, Sebastian Thorne looked at his wife and could not look away. "Eleanor." Her name broke in half in his mouth. They said you were dead." Eleanor stopped at the foot of the dais. She did not climb it. She let the whole hall see her standing on the common floor, looking up at the man on the high seat, and she let her voice carry the way the Dowager had once taught her a voice could carry. "Yes, I have heard. I have been dead for 4 years, my lord, in a convent that does not exist, of a barrenness that was a lie." She turned slowly and took in the hall. Every staring face, the dowager rigid in her chair, Cassia white to the lips. I was named Barren at this table, on the 9th of October, 4 years gone, before this same company. The Dowager Countess of Marrowby rose from that very chair and called me empty as a beggar's bowl, and my husband heard her say it, and let it stand. I told you all to remember the date. I see by your faces that some of you do. Eleanor, the Duke said again and took a step toward the edge of the dais. Where have you... There is so much you don't. There is so much you don't, Eleanor said, and it was not cruel, only level. And that levelness silenced him more completely than any scream could have. So let me tell it plainly, since plain speaking was never welcome in this house. I did not waste away. I was not barren. I left this hall 4 years ago, carrying a secret 11 weeks deep, and I left because 3 nights before, a child of this house overheard the Countess of Marrowby instruct that my tea be strengthened, that I be sickened slowly, deniably, so that everyone would nod and say the barren woman simply faded, and no one would think to look in the pot. The hall made a sound then, a low collective intake, and every eye went to the dowager. The old woman stood. The gilded chair scraped back against the stone, and she came to her full height, and for a moment she had the whole of her old authority in her face, the 50 years of Ravenscar, and the rings on her fingers, and the cold certainty that she had always been the one to name things and make the naming stick. Lies, the dowager said, and the word had weight she had spent 50 years building. The lies of a runaway harlot who fled her duty and dressed her shame in a dead woman's story. Where is your witness? Who speaks for a woman who vanished in the night? Who would believe a midwife's tale against the word of this house? I have 3 witnesses, Eleanor said. The first is this room. You named me barren before all of them, madam, and I said to them, remember the date. They remember. Look at their faces. A low sound moved through the crowd, the sound of 300 people realizing they were being called as evidence, and the dowager's certainty flickered. The second is the boy, now grown, who carried my tea those last 9 days and watched no other hand touch it. He is here, in this county, in my employ still, and he will speak before any court in the land. And the third, Eleanor lifted one hand, and behind her the Viscountess stepped forward into the cleared space, jeweled and unmistakable, her spine as straight as Eleanor's own. I am Honoria Vane, niece to the Marchioness of Harlow, the Viscountess said, clear and carrying. And 3 weeks past, this woman delivered my daughter living on the floor of a coast road inn with her own 2 hands, and I knew her face from this very hall. And I will swear on my child's life before any court in this land that she who stands before you is Eleanor, Duchess of Ravenscar, and no other. Call her a liar, madam, and you call me one, and the Marchioness of Harlow with me. The dowager turned to Cassia Fenwick. It was not a look of command, it was a look of appeal, and Cassia met it with a white face and said nothing. And the old woman was alone on the floor she had ruled for 50 years, and everyone in the hall saw it happen. This is theater, the dowager said, but her voice had no floor under it now. A trick, a desperate woman and a paid witness and a borrowed child. You have nothing but a story, and stories do not stand against... Against what? Eleanor said. She reached up and drew the thin gold chain from her collar, and on it, warm from 4 years against her heart, hung the small brass key. I have the leaves themselves, madam. I kept them. A midwife keeps everything. I wrote it in the diary I carried out of this house. The diary you never thought to wonder why I locked. Everything you said, everything you ordered, every date. In my own hand, begun the night you named me, continued the night my son was born, kept every night since. She closed her fingers around the key. You taught me to fear the things a careful woman can do in a cup. You did not stop to think a careful woman might do them right back. Not with poison, with patience, and a pen. The dowager opened her mouth, closed it. Something had gone out of her all at once, the same thing that had gone out of Cassia's smile 4 years before, the certainty that the other person would eventually stop fighting. Eleanor did not stop. She had walked 3 counties in gray homespun when she was 17 weeks gone with child. The woman before her had never walked anywhere she was not carried. The silence after that was a different silence. It was the silence of a room rearranging itself, of 300 people understanding at the same moment that the wind had changed direction and they had better change with it. The Duke had stopped looking at Eleanor. He was looking now at the small, gray-eyed boy whose hand was in hers, looking with a dawning, terrible, hope-struck attention, his own storm-gray eyes meeting their twins set in a 4-year-old face. And Eleanor watched the arithmetic of it move across her husband's features, watched him count exactly as she had taught herself to count, watched him arrive at the only sum it could make. Eleanor, he whispered, and his voice was nothing like the cold stone she had married. Is he? His name is Gideon, Eleanor said. He was born in a storm, 4 winters past, in a midwife's back room in a town whose name you have never heard, 8 months after I left this hall. He has your eyes. He has had no father and wanted none, because the one he was owed let his mother be named Barren at her own table, and did not look up. She drew the boy gently forward, her hand never leaving his. He is your son, my lord. He is the heir to Ravenscar, the only heir, the one they swore I could never give you, the one they would have poisoned in my body before he drew a breath. I did not bring him here for you. I brought him here so that every soul who called me empty would have to stand in this hall and watch the empty woman set the future Duke of Ravenscar on his own father's floor. Look at him, all of you. Look at what you cast out. And the hall looked. Cassia Fenwick was the first to break. 4 years of patience, 4 years of half-cried banns and a smile gone slowly sour. 4 years of waiting for a dead woman to stay dead. It came out of her all at once, and she rose from her seat with her pale hands shaking and her voice climbing where Eleanor's had always gone the other way. This is theater. This is a midwife's bastard dressed up in a story. There is no proof the brat is his. There is no... Sebastian, you will not stand here and let her, after everything, after I have waited, after I have given you 4 years of... Of what? The Duke said. The 2 words dropped into the hall like stones into still water. He had turned from his son to look at Cassia Fenwick, and the cold that Eleanor remembered was back in his face, but it was not aimed at her any longer. 4 years of what, my lady? He said again, very quietly, and he came down off the dais now, down onto the common floor where his wife stood, as though the high seat had become a thing he could no longer bear to sit upon. I have wondered these 4 years why my wife fled a house she had every reason to claim. I have torn this hall apart and ridden these roads to ruin asking it. And here tonight I have the answer, and it was given freely in this room not 5 minutes ago. and you have just confirmed it with your own mouth. T, a boy who carried it, a countess who gave the order, and you, my lady, seated at her right hand every season of that long, patient wait. He looked at the dowager. He looked back at Cassia. You have given me 4 years of a poisoned house. That is what you have given me. Cassia's mouth worked. Then she sat down. She did not speak again that day. The Duke turned to the dowager, and he was not a young man arguing with his mother's proxy now. He was the 8th Duke of Ravenscar, and his voice had the hall in it. You will remove yourself from this house by evening. Your dower arrangement will be reviewed by my solicitors next week, and any court appearance you are asked to make, you will make. My steward will attend you to Marrowby. Take your maid and your jewels, and nothing else, madam. You have made yourself a guest here long enough. The dowager looked at him. She had not been spoken to that way in 50 years. She looked at Eleanor. She looked at the boy. And the last of the certainty went out of her face, and what was left was something Eleanor did not expect and did not want to look at. The face of an old woman who had bet everything on one number and watched the wheel come up wrong. Eleanor looked away. She had said she came back to collect, not to gloat. The collecting, now that it was done, left her strangely quiet. The storm spent. The tide gone back. She looked instead at her son, who had said nothing, through all of it exactly as he had promised, who stood straight-backed with his hand in hers, and his gray eyes traveling the great hall with that frank, fearless interest, taking it all in, the carved swans, the tapestries, the candles, the staring faces, cataloging it as though he had always known it would one day be his to understand. The Duke knelt. He knelt on the common floor of his own hall in front of 300 guests, the cold, commanding 8th Duke of Ravenscar down on one knee in the rushes. Not to Eleanor, to the boy. He brought his proud gray eyes level with his son's proud gray eyes, and for a long moment the two of them simply looked at one another, the man and the small copy of the man, and the whole hall held its breath. Gideon, the Duke said. The name came carefully, as though he were learning to hold something he had been told all his life he would never be given. That is a good name, a strong one. Do you know who I am? Gideon studied him with his mother's level gravity. Mama says you're my father, he said. She says you let them be unkind to her, and you did not look up. A small frown. Did you? The hall did not breathe. Yes, the Duke said. He did not flinch from it, and Eleanor, who had braced for excuses for a great man's reflexive defense, felt something shift in her chest at the bare word. Yes, I did. I will not pretend to you that I did not, because your mother has clearly raised you on the truth, and I will not be the first man to lie to you. I let them be unkind to her. I was a coward in this very room, and it cost me 4 years, and very nearly cost me you, and there is nothing I can do to unspend that time. He looked up then from the boy to the woman, and the cold was all gone out of him. I can only ask, not demand. I have no right left to demand anything in this hall. I can only ask whether the door you walked out of might be a door you would consent to walk back in. On your terms, Eleanor. Written down, if you like. In ink. I find I have developed a great respect for things written down in ink. It was very near a smile. It was the first thing he had ever said to her that she wanted to keep. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Behind her she could feel the whole county waiting, and she understood that whatever she said now would be law in this house for the rest of her life. She had been given a poisoned cup and an averted face, and a frost-killed garden and 4 gray winters by the sea. She showed them what she had done with that. "I will give you my terms," Eleanor said. "Here is the first, and the rest can wait for ink. This boy is the heir to Ravenscar, acknowledged before this company tonight, and there will be no whisper ever, in any corner of this house, that he is anything else. And the first servant or cousin or guest who calls him a midwife's bastard answers to me, and you will learn quickly, all of you, that I am very good now at remembering exactly what was said, and on what date, and by whom." A low sound moved through the hall. Not laughter, but something near to it. The sound of a county recognizing the hand of a new and formidable mistress. "That is my first term. As for the rest—" She looked down at her husband, still on his knee in the rushes, and the levelness in her voice gentled just slightly, for the first time in 4 years. "As for the rest, yes, I will consider walking back in. Slowly. The way I do everything. And you will earn it the way I earned this, without running, and without pleading, one honest day at a time, until the account is square." The Duke bowed his dark head. When he raised it, there was wet on his face. He did not bother to hide, and he reached out, and Gideon, who had been told to hold his mother's hand and say nothing, and had done both, looked up at Eleanor for permission. She nodded. The boy let go of her hand and put it, small and certain, into his father's. And the 8th Duke of Ravenscar closed his fingers around his son's as though closing them around the whole of the rest of his life. That winter, the first hard frost silvered the conservatory glass again, the way it always did, the way it had on the 9th of October 4 years before, when a frightened woman had stood among dead roses and learned that she was carrying both a child and a death sentence. But the roses were not dead this winter. Eleanor had ordered the old frost-killed beds, torn out in the autumn and replanted, and she had stood over the gardeners in the cold to see it done. And so when the frost came, it came down over green leaves and banked new growth, white lace out over living things. She kept the diary. She kept it always. The brass key warm on her mother's chain, and on the last clean page of that first book, the book she had carried out of Ravenscar in gray, homespun with a sun beneath her ribs. She wrote one final line, and then began a new volume, because the first was full and the story in it was finished. "They named me Barren and cast me out," she wrote. "I returned holding the only heir to the name. I did not come back to be revenged. I came back to be true. And the difference between those two things is the whole of what I learned in 4 winters by the sea, that you cannot poison what you refuse to become. They reached for the cup. I reached for the pen. The pen won. It always wins, in the end, when the hand that holds it will not shake." She closed the book. Down the long hall, in the warm yellow light, she could hear her son laughing at something his father had said. The high, clear roar of him, a frost-wind sound. The sound of the one who cuts down, the sound of a house being taught, at last, to be better. Eleanor turned the brass key once in the lock and tucked the chain back beneath her collar, against her heart, where the warm, small weight of it had ridden every mile of every road she had ever walked to bring them all to this. And then the Duchess of Ravenscar rose and went to join her family in the light.